What if the woman a cowboy treated as only temporary help became the one person his family couldn't live without? Stay until the end to discover this emotional Wild West story of love, sacrifice, and second chances. If stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and press the bell icon for more unforgettable adventures. Montana Territory, 1887, was still recovering from one of the harshest storms the region had seen in years. Powerful winds had torn through Ethan Brooks' ranch, flattening barns, scattering cattle across the open plains, and destroying miles of wooden fencing. Ethan, a widowed cowboy who had already endured enough heartbreak, stood silently in the middle of the wreckage, wondering how one man could possibly rebuild everything alone. Since losing his wife 3 years earlier, every burden had rested on his shoulders. His only comfort was his 8-year-old son, Tommy, but the boy was too young to handle the demanding work that kept the ranch alive. Ethan searched neighboring towns for hired hands, but nearly every ranch had suffered similar damage after the storm. Workers were scarce, and those available demanded wages he simply could not afford. One afternoon, an elderly trader passing through mentioned a young Apache woman named Naya, who had been looking for honest work after becoming separated from her people during a difficult migration. Although Ethan hesitated because of the growing tension between settlers and Apache families, desperation forced him to set aside his doubts. He agreed to meet her, believing she might provide temporary help until the ranch recovered. The following morning, Naya arrived on horseback carrying little more than a worn leather bag and a neatly folded blanket. She greeted Ethan respectfully, speaking calm but confident English learned from missionaries years earlier. Her appearance was simple, yet her eyes reflected strength earned through hardship. Ethan explained that the job would last only until the ranch was repaired and harvest season ended. Naya accepted without complaint, asking for nothing except fair wages and a small place to sleep near the stable. Her quiet dignity surprised Ethan, though he remained careful not to become personally involved. From her very first day, Naya worked harder than anyone Ethan had ever hired. Before sunrise, she gathered loose horses, frightened by the storm, gently calming each animal before leading it back to the corral. She repaired damaged saddles using skills passed down by her father and spent long hours replacing broken fence posts with remarkable patience. Rather than complaining about the endless labor, she completed every task with steady determination. Ethan noticed her efficiency, but kept reminding himself that she was simply an employee who would soon leave once the ranch returned to normal. Tommy watched Naya with endless curiosity. Unlike the adults around him, he knew little about Apache traditions and carried none of the prejudice common among nearby settlers. During quiet afternoons, Naya showed him how to recognize deer tracks pressed into soft earth and explained which wild berries were safe to eat. She taught him that every living creature deserved respect because nature provided life to everyone equally. Tommy listened with excitement, asking countless questions while following her through nearby forests. For the first time since his mother's passing, genuine happiness returned to the boy's face. Although Tommy quickly welcomed Naya as a trusted friend, Ethan deliberately kept a respectful distance. Each evening he paid her wages, thanked her for the day's work, and returned inside the ranch house with Tommy for supper. Naya never complained when she prepared her own modest meals beside a small campfire near the stable. She understood that many settlers remained cautious around Apache people, and she refused to force acceptance where it was not freely given. Instead, she quietly gazed toward the distant mountains, wondering whether she would ever see her scattered family again. As the weeks passed, subtle changes appeared throughout the ranch, without Ethan fully realizing their source. The horses became calmer under Naya's careful handling. Injured calves recovered faster because of the herbal remedies she prepared, and broken tools somehow returned neatly repaired after disappearing overnight. Fresh Wildflowers occasionally decorated the porch, adding unexpected color to the weathered ranch house. Even Tommy began waking earlier each morning, eager to help with chores instead of hiding indoors. The property slowly transformed from a place marked by grief into one filled with quiet hope. Though Ethan still convinced himself these improvements were only temporary. Despite everything Naya accomplished, Ethan remained determined not to form emotional attachments. Losing his wife had taught him how deeply love could wound a person, and he refused to risk opening his heart again. He reminded himself almost daily that Naya belonged with her own people, and that their paths would soon separate forever. Yet every evening, as he watched Tommy laughing beside the campfire while listening to Naya's gentle stories about courage, family, and honor, Ethan felt something unfamiliar growing inside him. He simply did not realize that the ranch was no longer healing because of repaired fences alone. It was healing because Naya had quietly brought life back into a family that had nearly forgotten how to hope. As autumn painted the Montana hills, with shades of gold and crimson, Naya quietly prepared to leave before the first light touched the valley. She folded the same worn blanket she had carried since childhood, packed her few belongings into a small leather bag, and carefully cleaned the tiny shelter where she had been staying beside the stable. Before mounting her horse, she placed a beautifully hand-woven Apache blanket on the porch outside Ethan's house. It was one of the last gifts her late mother had made, yet Naya believed Ethan and Tommy deserved it more than she did. Without asking for thanks or saying goodbye, she quietly rode toward the distant mountains. Ethan stepped onto the porch just in time to see Naya disappearing along the narrow trail. He noticed the blanket and understood immediately that it was her farewell gift. For a brief moment, he considered calling her back, but pride and fear kept him silent. He convinced himself that this was the arrangement they had agreed upon from the beginning. She had completed her work, earned every dollar honestly, and now it was time for both of them to continue their separate lives. Watching her disappear beyond the hills, Ethan believed everything would soon return to the way it had always been. The silence settled over the ranch almost immediately. During the first few mornings, Ethan expected life to continue normally, but small problems began appearing everywhere. The horses grew nervous during feeding time and refused to calm down as they once had. A young colt injured its leg after breaking through a weak section of fencing that Naya had planned to repair before leaving. The chickens wandered outside their pens, and simple chores suddenly seemed to consume the entire day. Ethan worked from sunrise until darkness, yet every evening the ranch still felt unfinished in ways he could not explain. Tommy struggled even more than his father. The cheerful little boy who had laughed while exploring forests with Naya became unusually quiet. He stopped asking questions about animal tracks and no longer rushed outside each morning with excitement. Instead, he sat on the porch, holding the small wooden whistle Naya had carved for him during one peaceful afternoon beside the creek. Every evening, he looked toward the mountains, hoping to catch sight of her returning on horseback. Ethan tried to comfort his son, but he knew that no words could replace the friendship the boy had unexpectedly found. As the days passed, Ethan began noticing countless little details he'd never appreciated while Naya was there. Fresh bread no longer greeted them each morning because no one woke before sunrise to bake it. Broken harnesses remained unrepaired until they became impossible to use. The colorful, wild flowers that once decorated every window slowly dried and disappeared. Even the ranch house itself seemed colder, despite the fire burning brightly inside. Ethan finally understood that Naya had quietly filled every corner of their lives with kindness, never asking for recognition or praise in return. Cleaning the barn one evening, while Ethan discovered a small leather pouch hidden behind several tools. Inside were carefully dried herbs with handwritten instructions explaining how to treat injured horses during the coming winter. Next to the herbs lay a simple note in neat handwriting. It thanked Ethan for giving her honest work when others had turned her away because she was Apache. She wrote that Tommy reminded her of the younger brother she had lost years earlier and wished both of them happiness. Reading those words, Ethan felt overwhelming regret for never truly welcoming her into his family. That night, Ethan could barely sleep. Every memory replayed in his mind. The mornings when Naya quietly repaired fences before anyone else awoke, the evenings when Tommy laughed around her campfire, and the gentle way she treated every living creature with patience and respect. He realized she had never expected friendship, yet she had given them loyalty beyond anything money could buy. Looking at the handmade Apache blanket spread across the chair beside his bed, Ethan finally admitted a truth he had been denying for weeks. Naya had become part of the ranch and part of his heart without either of them noticing. Before dawn the following morning, Ethan saddled his strongest horse and packed enough supplies for several days of travel. Tommy ran outside carrying the wooden whistle, begging his father to bring Naya home if she was willing to return. Ethan promised he would try with all his heart. Following the narrow trail leading toward the mountains, he rode through forests, rivers, and open valleys, determined to find the woman he had once considered only temporary help. For the first time since losing his wife, Ethan understood that home was never built by wood, fences, or cattle alone. It was built by the people whose kindness filled empty hearts, and he prayed he was not too late to bring Naya back.